I'm the co-founder of a Bitcoin startup named CoinMotion. My name is Tom, and I'm going to be giving a short intro to Bitcoin. How many of you are familiar with Bitcoin? So quite a few. But I'll start with the basic scenario. Let's say I'm at the party with my friend. Let's call him Fred. And me and Fred, we use apples as a currency. So if I give Fred an apple, it's quite simple. All I need to do to verify that the transaction has been made is look at Fred. He has the apple, and I don't have the apple. But one day, we get tired of having to be in the same physical room and having to carry around the apple. So we decide we want the digital currency. So we agree that we take a picture of the apple, and that's going to be our new currency. So Fred owes me an apple, and I ask him to email the apple to me. This is where it gets interesting, a bit more complicated. How do I know that the apple is now mine and only mine? How do I know that Fred didn't make copies of the apple? How can I trust him? So as a solution, we decide that we need a ledger, kind of like a notebook that has all the transactions in it. But since we're digital, we need someone to maintain and host the ledger, a person we trust. So we have a solution, but there are some new problems. How can we trust this person? How do we know that the person doesn't just decide to get rich by giving himself 1 million apples? And then there's the issue that I'm no longer in control of my own apples. If I want to give Fred an apple, now I have to go through the person we trust. And he makes the transfer from my account to Fred's account. So there are a few problems, and as a solution, we decide to make the ledger public. So instead of one person having the ledger, we give everyone a copy. So no one person can manipulate the ledger, since everyone has a copy. This is pretty much Bitcoin. Bitcoin enables us to make this ledger public, give a copy to everyone. And there are a lot of benefits to it. Like now, if Fred gives me an apple, I can check the public ledger and see that I actually have the apple now. It's mine and only mine, and no one else can use it. And I can verify this through the ledger. And there are a couple of additional benefits to this. Bitcoin is open source, so anyone can contribute and continue developing it. It's hard to cheat the system. If I'm going to transfer Fred 100 apples, anyone can check my account and see that I don't have 100 apples. So I can't transfer 100 apples I don't have the Fred. So I'm simplifying a bit, but this is basically what Bitcoin is. It's a public ledger that enables this, that makes this possible. The apples are called Bitcoins, but it's basically the same thing. And the ledger is called the blockchain. Bitcoin was created in 2008 by a guy, an anonymous guy, who goes by the name Satoshi Nakamoto. And from there, it has continued as an open source project, with thousands of smart people contributing and continuing to develop the system. It's commonly referred to as a cryptocurrency, since it's based on and secured by cryptography. You can buy and sell Bitcoins from several exchanges and services like ours, CoinMotion, in exchange for euros or dollars or rupees, almost any traditional currency. And sending Bitcoin is as easy as sending an email, and you can use them to buy almost anything. The Bitcoin network is hosted and maintained and secured by individuals that are called miners. Miners verify the transactions, and as a reward, they have a chance to get newly generated Bitcoins. After transactions are made and verified, they're put in the public ledger that's completely transparent and public to everyone. That's called the blockchain. And it's not just for currency. Almost any data, like contracts or property ownerships, can be input in the blockchain and securely stored in that way and verified. Almost €250,000 of venture capital has been injected into Bitcoin. and over half of that during this year. Bitcoin is growing at a tremendous pace, and there's a reason for that. Bitcoin reduces the cost of financial transactions to almost nothing. And you don't need a bank or clearinghouse in between. You actually have the ownership of your apples, not like if you use a third party to host a ledger. With Bitcoin, you actually own your Bitcoins, and you're free to transfer them where you need to transfer them to. And you don't need a bank or clearinghouse. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. Thank you. This is a brief introduction. If you have any additional questions, please find me from the crowd. Thank you.
So after that introduction, we've assembled a panel here of Bitcoin activists and entrepreneurs to talk about how they see the ecosystem today and what they believe the future will bring. And just to introduce myself, my name's Simon Levine. I'm a partner at Mosaic Ventures, which is a London-based early-stage venture capital firm. And we're a new fund, but since we launched our fund this summer, out of our 3 announced investments, 2 are in Bitcoin. One's called blockchain.info, and the other's called Blockstream, which was just announced yesterday. So I'm moderating this, but let me ask our 3 panelists to introduce themselves.
Sure. My name is Sean Percival. I'm a partner with 500 Startups. We are the most active seed investor in Silicon Valley. We've done about 880 seed deals. That's 880. I also run the accelerator in Mountain View, where we accelerate about 120 companies every year. My focus is on Bitcoin specifically as well, in terms of seed deals that I do. I've invested in about 12 early-stage Bitcoin companies.
All right, my name is Martti Malmi. I'm the first developer of Bitcoin after its original creator. And I worked with a project from 2009 to 2011. Doing some coding and documentation and just talking to people about Bitcoin. And actually, I even ran bitcoinexchange.com for some time before selling it to Mt. Gox for 100 Bitcoins. Yeah, and these days I'm working on other startups that I'm hoping can change the world.
Okay, my name is Jeremias Kangas. I'm founder of localbitcoins.com, which is the geographically biggest Bitcoin trading platform there is. And well, I have been involved with Bitcoin from 2011, and I started doing Bitcoin stuff full time in 2012.
So first question, this Slush is an amazing event. It's gathered 13,000 people from Finland and all over Europe. I think there was one talk that the 2 of you just gave on the main stage earlier today about Bitcoin, and then this panel. But for me, what's interesting about Bitcoin is that it can be a little impenetrable, a little hard to understand. And I'm slightly surprised it hasn't been a bigger theme at Slush. Why do you think Bitcoin hasn't been easy to translate to the sort of wider public, and what does that say about the state of Bitcoin today?
I think it's very like the early days of the internet. And when I was first getting online in 1993, 94, I had to load 3 programs to actually get online. So I had to connect to a local bulletin board system. I had to launch a sort of socket program to actually connect, and then I had to launch the browser. So Bitcoin is very much like that. The normal sort of non-techie person, it's difficult to jump in and understand what's going on. And so we see this in new technologies. New technologies are difficult to use, the design sucks, and it's hard to get started. And Bitcoin's like that too. I don't think general consumers understand encryption or two-factor authentication or all the various acronyms that we have. So the duty on the entrepreneurs and us as investors is to build tools to help onboarding, to make it easier, and more so people can sort of get started without having to understand all the technical barriers that are in the way.
And Jeremias, as someone who has customers. You've got, as I think you should tell a little bit about your company, how many customers you have. What is the biggest challenge that you see for new people to join?
Yeah, it's definitely like making things easy to use. So far we have 400,000 registered users and about a little less than 1,000 new users registering on weekdays. And well, the thing is that those users convert really badly to paying customers. So let's say we have 40,000 to 50,000 paying customers. So the problem is like many people are interested about Bitcoin and so on, but like what are the first steps? They like to look around, but it's like really big step to actually put some money in it, and that's like a huge barrier. And you have to make the steps as little as possible in a way. Like each step, like let's say you have to upload your passport or so. Each step is like one more step, which keeps the person like having second thoughts about buying.
I agree on that. I think payments should be something that is completely invisible, because users don't want to know anything about encryption or that kind of geeky stuff.
And how far away do you think we are from that moment where you swipe a card and it's in fact paying with Bitcoin, you don't even know it, or you put in an ID online? Is that months away, years away? How if you had to make a bet, let's go down the line. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's 1 to 2 years away. And people are trying to create the Bitcoin credit card, but of course the banks, they don't really like competition. So every time they try and get forward with the Bitcoin credit card, they sort of shut them down. But I would say it's still incredibly early, at least 1 to 2 years away before we see really mass adoption kicking in.
Marty?
You said we should disagree on things, but I actually agree on this. It's a couple of years away, but we're getting there all the way. It's getting always easier to use Bitcoin.
Okay.
Well, sometimes there have been, for a short time, there have been companies which have been selling Bitcoins with credit card, but those companies usually live a really short time.
Yeah. So I wasn't picking credit card as the best use case. I was just saying as something that was like Main Street, but a browser-based or a wallet-based system that is seamless and invisible, I think is probably a better way to describe it.
I must say mobile payments, mobile phone is also something that everyone has. I think that's going to be something in the future.
I think like Bitcoin already is the best peer-to-peer mobile payment solution, because it's quite easy to grasp using QR codes and transferring money from each to the other. Okay, one way to make it even easier would be to use phone number, but that's not international in a sense that it's a little bit. No one can offer international mobile payment solution which uses mobile, which is not local in a sense. But Bitcoin is like a global mobile payment solution, and that's quite unique already. But
yeah, but I think if you look at Apple Pay, I think that's opening the door to paying with mobile phones.
Yeah.
As I look to the future, there's no way in hell in 20 years we're using cash or credit cards. It's going to be some other medium. And Apple Pay, it's not Bitcoin based, obviously, but at least that's going to drive consumers into the sort of the process of putting that phone down versus getting the wallet.
I disagree quite strongly on that, because I use mobile payments and they suck. I don't want my money to have battery. I want offline solution. So I think that's very crucial, and that's why I think credit cards are not going away. So and definitely mobile payments are great for peer-to-peer payments, but for like making more professional payments, credit cards are gonna stay, I think.
If we can agree, just bring it back to Bitcoin around the fact that the infrastructure needs to be built, and whether it's 1 year, 2 years, sooner or later, what are the most important pieces of infrastructure that are still missing? And maybe we can start with you, Marty, as you were one of the illustrious handful of first developers, so you have a sort of first-hand knowledge of the code base. What would you say if you had to pick one thing that needs to be improved? What would that be?
I think we could use all kinds of overlay networks. One example of such a network is Stellar, which is based on the Ripple protocol. and it's a decentralized system for currency exchange. So you can just make a payment using euros, and the recipient can get bitcoins or whatever he wants, and anyone can become a liquidity provider in that network. I think that's an interesting project.
Okay. And Jeremias, so we got one vote for overlay networks. What would you say?
Personally, I see like use cases where like the other party has already has bitcoins, but he can like automate transactions to, let's say, India or China, or anyway make lots of tiny transactions. That's kind of use case which is really useful for certain new type of businesses, and that's kind of infrastructure thing. So we are kind of working on that. So.
Okay. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, those are mostly what I'm investing in. And when you think of how Amazon changed the web, back in the day, you had to set up all these servers, and there was all this shit you had to go through. And then Amazon said, well, listen, what if with a push of a button, you could spin up 1 server or 1,000 servers? Same, we're seeing that with Bitcoin. So anything that will allow you to sort of develop applications rapidly without having to fully understand the Bitcoin D, which is sort of the core of Bitcoin, which honestly, only gentlemen like this are smart enough to work with. Most developers need a little bit more help. They need a framework. They need a little bit more guidance. And so back in the day, it was very complicated to make a wallet, and I've invested in a company that allows you to create a wallet with 4 lines of code. So we've gone from a very complex system to 4 lines of codes. So we're going to keep seeing that happen.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say.
I can say that Bitcoin D is pain in the ass, but the software. Yeah. But yeah, well, things are definitely getting more easier, and also the open source software and open source wallets are also getting much better. That's all like very surprising to me. So in a way, because usually open source software is never really user friendly. But if you look at the current Android mobile apps and so on, they are quite good nowadays.
So if we can agree that the world of Bitcoin is a bit like the world of the web in 1993 or 94, I don't know if that's a perfect analogy with TCP/IP and HTTP, but you know, if you were not leading your company, Jeremias, if you were not captain of the local Bitcoin space, if you look out on the landscape, which other Bitcoin company would you be most excited to be the CEO of today, and why?
Blockchain info is good, but I think they have stagnated, so that's not very interesting anymore in a sense that the other smaller startups are innovating more. But I would say something like Open Bazaar, if you are familiar with the process, like even more decentralized solutions and these kind of things that create resilience for the Bitcoin.
So Open Bazaar is a sort of a Bitcoin version of eBay, which is a trustless marketplace to exchange goods in Bitcoin. So it's a very interesting company. What about you, Marty? I know that you're working with Moni now and on Stellar-related things, but if you were doing something else in the Bitcoin world, what would you pick and why?
I would be the CEO of local Bitcoins, I think.
You're trying to take his job. Okay.
Yeah, I think
you are signed up.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job making trading easier, making things easier without compromising too much of the decentralization of Bitcoin.
Thanks.
and Sean, I know that you're now investing. So if you could invest in a company out there that you're not an existing investor in, which one would you pick and why?
You know, good question, and I'll avoid plugging one of my own companies, and I'll actually say the company doesn't exist. I haven't seen it yet. My background mostly is in consumer marketing, so I want people to use Bitcoin without knowing they're using Bitcoin. And so some examples may be a mobile app where you're sort of tipping and changing people. Every time I drive it, you know, we're in San Francisco, and so we got to pay for parking a lot. Like, my car should just be sending Bitcoins as I drive through the terminal. I just don't have to pull my wallet out for anything. If I want to pass someone on the freeway, maybe I can give them a little Bitcoin and it lets me go through. So I'm interested in things that are driving consumer adoption, that use Bitcoin as the backbone and technology without the consumer actually knowing it. So I'm waiting for that.
And so if you had to pick one of those applications, you know, in the birth of the web, it was, you know, email was a very viral way for folks to adopt HTTP, and then of course there was the adult industry. You know, what would you say in the world of Bitcoin would be one of the most important early use cases?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the most important, the most meaningful, and I've also done some investing here, is remittance. Remittance is a very, very large market. And then if you don't know, this is for sending money abroad. So if you're sending money to India, you shouldn't have to pay 10%. And that's some of the efficiency that Bitcoin brings. And so I've invested in a few companies that are doing that. So not only can we benefit as investors and technologists, but the world can actually save money. 10% to a company or to a family that needs that money internationally makes a huge difference.
There's a lot of inefficiency in the system. So and obviously Moni, which you're working on, Marty, is a remittance business, but so you're betting your time on that as an important use case. Is there another one, now that Sean's picked that one, that you would pick?
Yeah, I would say international payments as well. It just makes things so much cheaper and easier. And I always buy my plane tickets with Bitcoin from foreign countries.
So this is when you go to a bank and you want to wire money abroad, it costs 20, 30 euros plus you pay an exchange rate differential. So the banks make a lot of money from us, and we don't always know it even. What about you, Jeremias?
I completely agree that the remittance business is the one that is going to be the real first application, and we are seeing that like starting to gain some ground now. So we have increasing amounts of users in Philippines and Thailand, for example. But the other thing is also like this kind of international people will move a lot, and kind of expats will live 1 year in one country, and maybe they slowly start storing their wealth in Bitcoin because it's so much easier. For example, when we hired one Spanish guy to work for us in Finland, it took 2 months for him to get bank account, like internet banking in Finland, because banks are very strict about it. But if you have Bitcoin, you can just use it, and you don't have to sign papers, and it makes life easier. So that's one thing. In addition, that many people believe it's a good store of value.
And maybe just to illustrate, these are the applications of the future, and remittance is a $500 billion industry that should go to zero or a few $1 billion maybe. Maybe you can talk about some of the things that you've spent Bitcoin on in the past. So what did you spend your first Bitcoin on, Jeremias?
Well, I didn't spend them for quite a long time at first, but then when I moved to Berlin in 2011, I went to this room. The first day I moved to Berlin, I bicycled to. First I got a bicycle, then I bicycled to Room 77, the legendary bar in Berlin, which accepts Bitcoins. And usually when I was like really skeptical, like the bartender was like, can I pay using Bitcoin? I hope it's not too much hassle. But yeah, of course we can. And sometimes we waited for 1 hour to the transaction to get through because the technology was so crappy back then. Nowadays it's much easier. But
so you bought a beer or a different?
Beer and burger.
Beer and burger. What about you, Marty? What was your first Bitcoin transaction?
Well, I was actually the first person to do a Bitcoin to dollar transaction. I sold like 5,050 Bitcoins to someone who was starting a Bitcoin exchange. And he paid $5 on PayPal.
$5 for 5,000 Bitcoins.
Right.
No.
Maybe another notorious purchase was the purchase of beer with 100 Bitcoins from my friend.
So you were an early miner, so 100 Bitcoins at that time bought you a beer.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a very expensive beer now.
That would buy you beer for the rest of your life.
Yeah, like
today,
30 grand. Yes.
And very good beers.
Maybe we can talk about the future in a slightly negative way, and I don't want to finish on this, but if you worry about something that could affect the Bitcoin ecosystem negatively, what's over the horizon that could be problematic, that could push out that 1 or 2 years further, or maybe even threaten the whole ecosystem altogether. What's the one thing that kind of keeps you up at night? Maybe we start with you, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not the bad news that you hear, and you probably hear a lot of that. Emerging markets, you have bad actors. We've moved beyond most of that. But my concern, I think, to my earlier point of consumer adoption, if we do not drive consumer adoption, investors don't have interest, entrepreneurs don't build great products. So anything that may stall or halt, whether that be regulation or the technology does not get easier to use. So consumer adoption, it has slowed a little bit. It was a little bit of a feeding frenzy, and it slowed. So hopefully we see an uptick over the next year.
Marty?
I would say the centralization of mining, because the manufacturers have such an advantage in the market. They can just mass produce their chips and create big data centers where all the mining is getting centralized.
So because Bitcoin is an open source community, if you have more than 50% of control, then that threatens the vitality of the ecosystem. And it's a pressing issue with the sort of arms race of mining. What about you, Jeremias?
I would add probably that the centralization of anything in the Bitcoin space. So let's say that if the Bitcoin exchange businesses are going to consolidate, and there is only 3 big Bitcoin exchange platforms, so that's not very ideal in a sense that then they are really easy to control for the governments. But in the end, it doesn't matter because they are just the pathways to the open Bitcoin economy. So.
And do you worry about regulation and the government?
Yeah, regulation, of course. That's one. Regulation hasn't been like I think now it's coming, but like banks have been pain in the ass in Bitcoin community for quite a long time. But I think like now also governments are taking some kind of stance. I think banks are investing money in the lobbying and try to get Bitcoin businesses quit or something like that. Of course, that's like hopeless, but anyway.
And I guess if there was one thing from a government's point of view that you would look at Bitcoin, do you think you'd look at Bitcoin favorably or unfavorably? Because there's concern about money laundering and all sorts of other things like that, and a tax being put on it. Is it something that you think governments can intervene, or is it something that forever is going to remain apart?
Definitely government can intervene. It's just like changes some things, and we have lots of government cooperation with our officials, and at the first they are like mostly interested like how this affects my job. I want to keep my comfy chair and everything, and I don't want to think too much. But then again, there are some of the government people are really positive about Bitcoin, and that has been surprising. We have got better advice from the Finnish Central Police than we have get for free than we have gotten from any lawyers or anything like that.
Yeah, I think I would add on regulations, some countries are going to fight against it, and those countries will lose, because some countries are going to drive innovation. United States, California, technology especially, they're not going to stifle innovation there. Countries, Russia, India, they can block it. The cat's out of the bag, though, and so we will just simply build and invest in the countries that are favorable, and right now it's really looking like Southeast Asia is sort of the winner. I mean, they are a financial hub already. They're really understanding it. They're taxing it correctly. So countries can try and block it if they want, but they're sort of tough to stop it at this point.
And maybe Marty, we're running out of time, but maybe we can finish with you, as you were someone who was really one of the first contributors to the whole ecosystem. And if in the audience there are developers who today are developing, the world's next great mobile game or wearable or some of the other things that Finland is known for, why should they think about Bitcoin? Would you say why is it so important for the future?
Well, they can simply save money and do something cool and something that makes the world a better place at the same time. I know all the startups say that, but this time we're for real.
So this is changing the world of money, which is a fairly big market. Okay, well with that, thank you to the panel, to Sean and Marty and Jeremias, and wish you well at the after party tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.